Once, all was without beginning or end, as a ring is. Its form was without measure, and it was full and empty, an expanse without division. For division was not within it, nor without it, and it was whole and still. Until, at last, a great change came upon it, and time arose with a great suddenness, and there came division, and many came from one, as droplets from one water, and they have cause to return, and they have cause to set forth. This discord is the means of their every expression, the shaping of their every form. Their journey proceeds along a single path, a path of two ways. The way that narrows is the path to order, and the way that broadens is the path to chaos. And they go upon it with perpetual resolve, now beckoned one way, now shown the other. At the outset of their journey, all was disarray, but chaos lost its hold, and there arose the necessary forms, as boughs from the root of time, and they were in all places, and in none, as tides to their waters, and they were as gods, and all things were by them made, surfaced by the currents of the deep. There formed the stars and the lands, the suns and the waters, and then, sometime along the way, nature gathered upon itself, and life took form, a form graced by perception and blessed by the means to think upon its world. But to be granted life is to be granted a shadow that shall go with the living all the days of their lives, as a beast stalks its prey, and it shall be their guide, their most loyal companion, until, at the appointed time, their shadow shall usher them away. So began but one land among many, the lands between, an unremarkable realm distinguished simply by its position among others, and like all others, this land was a product of the natural state of the world, a state that stemmed from the highest of powers. Gods, kami, the very forces of nature, through whose friction came land and sea, gravity, colour's innate power, and, finally, life. But for the lands between, whose history has always been shaped by external influences, it may be that no life arose at all, and instead arrived from far away. Life's beginnings were harsh, natural selection lacked nuance, and favoured sheer strength above all else. This led to ancient life forms of significantly larger proportions than those in the present day, and one life form, of colossal size, naturally rose to the top. The rise of these titans as the dominant life form began the most ancient known age of the lands between. Their reign expanded across the entirety of the present-day landmass, and oversaw the beginning of the Stone Age. Although there is no definitive evidence of a written language, the technological advancements and stonework of their civilization were truly astonishing. Elaborately crafted megalithic structures can be found throughout the lands between. Eons of weathering have rendered the stone smooth, yet they still stand strong, a true testament to the skill of the age, and all without the use of mortar. Made with stone blocks of such size that the Titans are the only known creatures who could have been responsible. The weathered, smooth stone distinguishes structures of this ancient era, and yet the labour and artistry poured into carving each and every stone face, likely in situ, remains clear. What such carvings mean, however, has been lost to time. So long ago was this culture. The Titan structures, though imposing in the current day, conceal their true scale, for they extend deep within the earth. A curious detail, and the first of many clues that point to the extent of the land's transformation through the ages. But the Titan skills went far beyond their masonry, For the Titans wove the very fabric of life into black stone and crafted artificial life. An ominous development, foreshadowing what would become a fixation for the lands between, the manipulation of life and its natural cycles. Thus were golems created, bearing the same intricate detailing and weathered stone aesthetic as the structures of the era. Curiously, this technique likely became well established, since a golem crafter suggests there were multiple such artisans. Indeed, golems serve as a crucial window into the era. These black stone golems appear to have been purpose-built for combat, each equipped with bespoke weaponry. This suggests that, despite the Titans' dominion, there was no peace or unity in the land. There was such conflict that the Titans resorted to crafting artificial life to enforce order. Those that resisted were far smaller than the Titans, likely dwarfed by the golems, for golems were equipped with extra protection around their ankles, hinting at the size of their adversaries. After eons of fighting such foes, few golems remain today with their protective ankle gear intact, but those that do remain formidable opponents. There are more than just the black stone golems, head covering made from the largely unaltered head of an impish golem. On closer inspection, although the detailing differs from the structures of the age, the stone of the imps, and indeed the catacomb watchdogs, also exhibits the distinctive weathering typical of the age, albeit more subtly given their smaller size and sheltered environment. Furthermore, to cement the similarities between these three golems, there is the crystal dart. Long ago, it is said that a golem crafter employed a similar crystal tool. This crystal dart, when used on any of these golems, causes them to malfunction, either stunning them, or even making them short-circuit and turn hostile to everything around them. The crystal dart also points to the final lifeform that the Titans created, the Crystallians, a deed impossible for a human. The Crystallians are inorganic beings, yet they live. Now, these beings are inscrutable and are supposed to have but one clear purpose, to safeguard their crystals unto the end. The Crystallians were the most complex artificial creation. Though humans cannot understand them, the Crystallians' faint cognition is known as the wisdom of stone. Their magic staff can only be wielded by those of intellect high enough to grasp such wisdom, a substantial 48 intelligence, with output only slightly bested by the Carian regal scepter. Curious, given the similarity of their respective sigils. The true purpose of the Crystallians has been lost to time, for in their hidden intelligence there was likely some grander purpose behind their crystal hoarding. Returning to golems, the design of the imps and watchdogs illustrates the diversity of life already present in this ancient era, for despite their modern roles as guardians of Erdtree catacombs, it appears that golem technology was lost with the extinction of the Titans. No new golems exist in the present day lands between, and anything relating to golems, Crystallians, and indeed all other forms of artificial life is shrouded in the mystery of this ancient age. The marionettes fixate on crystals. Gargoyles are so run down some cannot move, and the rest have been mended with corpse wax, a patchwork. Therefore, the design of these artificial lifeforms undoubtedly reflects the era of their creation. As early as the Titan Age, there was glintstone and sorcery. Crystal sorceries ranged from encapsulating the wrath of the Crystallians to manifesting the crystal sun, which serves as further evidence of the lifeform's complexity. Glintstone sorcery was imbued as an ash of war into the watchdog's staff. The term crozier means a hooked staff carried by a bishop as a symbol of pastoral office, which, though this staff is hardly hooked, also points to religious systems. There were social hierarchies, which extended not just to Crystallians, where some sorceries were reserved for high-ranking adepts among the Crystallians, but also among golems. The watchdogs are even said to command the imps. There were even strata within golem variants. Some imp golems were given autonomous life, while others were crafted only as a powerful lock and key system, a design that remains relevant even in modern times. The range of imps showcases the variety of life forms that had already taken root in the lands between. There were feline creatures, fanged and long-tongued demons, and even wolves. It's clear that death and its natural cycles were well established, as was the transfer of generational wisdom. Indeed, it's possible that the imps and watchdogs already served as guardians of the deceased. Finally, the aesthetic of the corpse imp head may indicate the presence of humans, and perhaps even more. Extremely heavy, this great bow requires enormous strength just to draw, suggesting it was not designed for human use. Though this could be in relation to the Tarnished attempting to wield the bow in the present day, it may instead refer to the age in which they were made, that, when created, humans could have tried to wield them. Might humans have been part of the Titan Alliance, as well as other species as suggested by the imp variants? After all, the incredible mechanisms behind the imp locks, or indeed the lifts of the divine towers, don't seem to have been made for titans, who had no trouble reaching such heights, but were instead for those of smaller stature to be able to join them in the sky. And such a huge investment could only have been for allies, for those within the Titan culture. But the question remains, for what? Why build the towers at all? The divine towers, though they have since been repurposed by the Two Fingers, were originally built to pay homage to meteorites. These towers, the tallest artificial structures ever built that seem to reach up to the heavens themselves, all feature at their top a mound of earth, encircled by 8 meteoric ores, which are each framed as if to honour them. While the central earth may seem unremarkable, the stonework encircling it matches other meteoric impact sites found throughout the lands between. This, combined with the 8 surrounding meteoric ores, gives the first cultural window for the Titans. Meteorites were central to their belief system, and the towers were constructed to venerate them, or perhaps even to harness their power. Did Titans arrive to these lands via meteorites, or did a god bestow favour on them through meteorites? Indeed, the style and positioning of the 8 ores surrounding what once might have been a larger meteoric deposit, as well as the detailing around each ore, is very suggestive of the deity now known as the Fell God. And the Forge of the Giants, whose size, carvings, and foundation are all clearly of Titan origin, ties these elements together. The Giants and the Titans were both favoured by the Fell God. In fact, they were likely kin. The Titan species exhibited substantial variation in stature, as shown by the difference in size between the Kalid corpses and those in the mountaintops. Thus, perhaps the Giants were simply the smallest of Titan kin, which could explain why both the Giants and Titans drew power from the Fell God. Indeed, as with other gods whose power manifests strongly within life, this god lived within the Giants' stomachs, though some gods' power is seen behind the eyes. In any case, it was the Titan faction that was responsible for creating the Forge, and the Forge provides the second cultural window into the Titans, for in its design and associations are snakes and dragons. Not only does this place both respective cultures as early as this age, but it likely illustrates positive relations or even alliances between these factions. Throughout Dragon Society, there is a focus on balance and natural cycles, something that will be looked at in due course. As such, it follows that, to remain on good terms with the dragons, the Titans were also a faction that at least abided by, if not also centered on, nature's cycles. For example, though the Titans had dominion over the entire land, from their corpse locations it seems they chose not to live in every region, and left some undisturbed. But surely this is contrary to their deity. The supreme power of the Fell God is the Flame of Ruin. So how did that play into the cycles of life? Well, the cycles of the lands between centre around much more than life and death, which will soon become clear. And between the Forge, the Divine Towers, and the technology of artificial life, The Titan's legacy is clearly not defined by destruction. After all, the golems seem to have been brought to life with the power of their flames, which illustrates a knowledge of their fire that has been lost in the present day. Where dragons exist as divine eternity, and snakes exist as mortal eternity, it seems the Titans landed somewhere between them. Dragons, Titans, and snakes. With such powers working in harmony, surely this age would last forever. And yet, through a twist of fate, the age of the Titans ended just as it began, at the behest of meteorites, an extinction event. Wherever you look in the lands between, there is evidence of dramatic geographical changes, all the way from the Weeping Peninsula, which has become an island since its naming, to the Forge of the Giants, which was surely once tethered on all four sides. Everywhere has undergone profound alterations, but of particular note here are the Titan constructions. The majority of them, outside the mountaintops of the Giants, seem to be entrenched within the earth, almost as if supporting the current day landmass. They are found deep within caves, nestled within mountains, or propping up areas where the Weeping Peninsula might have once connected to the mainland. They are encased in the earth like divine rebars, just like the Titan corpses, at least until the earth around them is eroded away. The divine towers naturally remain above ground, and yet they still reach deep into the earth. The Titans, with their sheer size, couldn't have been a subterranean civilization. So, what is going on? The answer is hiding in plain sight. There is a peculiar but distinctive rock adorned to the sides of the towers. Every tower has this, including the icon within the map. This rock face is clearly a fundamental part of the history of the Divine Towers, and yet it is equally clear that it was a later addition. On closer inspection, the rock shape is not artificial. It has no clear design to it. Instead, it appears almost like a cooled liquid or magma. So what could have generated such a large-scale expulsion of molten rock? Contrary to the natural pressures that had typically dictated survival, there came a cataclysm that uniquely selected against size. For the lands between was hit by a meteorite event of such magnitude that the Titans had no means to avoid it. Only life forms small enough to burrow within the earth, or those capable of flying well above it, managed to endure the calamity, an event that in all likelihood was responsible for the central crater of the lands between. The impact's size and energy caused an expulsion of vast amounts of molten debris across the entire land, conditions for which the Titans had no defense or shelter. As shown by each of the Divine Towers, the magma was thrown in all directions, illustrating the sheer scale of the catastrophe. In one fell swoop, the Titans met their extinction, the land was covered with a new stratum of earth, and the inaugural age of the lands between was over. And yet, life found a way, and resumed nature's cycles competing for dominion. The lands between saw countless civilizations come and go, but there was one that was truly eternal, where snakes persist through mortal means, never truly extinguished, and life forms akin to Titans rise and fall through time, vying for their moment in the sun. There are beings who are truly everlasting, the ancient dragons, whose society has fundamentally shaped the history of the lands between. In the present day, this ancient civilization has fallen to ruin, but there is still plenty to glean from what is left. The theme of frozen time permeates the ruins of Majula. Placidusax is found at the heart of the storm beyond time, a storm which endlessly rages within the perpetually floating city. Countless dragons tirelessly fly around the nearby skies, and those that remain in the city appear almost inert, creatures of living rock. In the center of the city, there is etched into the wall an Elden Ring, complex and multi-layered order winding into spirals as it falls down. Then throughout the city is a focus on death, for though Majula was thrown into the sky before the Night of Black Knives, Deathroot is found in every corner. Those who live in death plague the ruins, and worm faces group at its depths. The very architecture immortalizes the dead, integrating corpses into the brickwork, and even as part of the chest design. A temple pays homage to a dead dragon skull, in which are found a godskin noble and apostle, who wield the black flame which could once slay gods, the flame that drew power from destined death, the power of the Gloam-Eyed Queen. Indeed, the city wasn't solely constructed for dragons. Beastmen roam throughout the ruins as those who live in death, or can be found entombed within the brickwork of the buildings themselves. They wear garments that display their involvement within this society. There are rooms dedicated to their burial, statues of beastmen with those of dragons, and some beastmen were even granted the power of red lightning for use either as incantations or to imbue into their weapons. The beastmen had a religious system complete with hierarchical ranks. Then there were draconians, people of the ancient dragons, who bore a stony face. These humans seem to have had their own societal structure too, overseen by royalty who were immortalized in stonework throughout the city. Majula is also home to a number of unmodified stormhawks, which may suggest they too inhabited the city, and each of these species relates to the dragons in some manner. Dragons are a form of beast themselves. They can change their form to become humanoid, and the stormhawks appear to be their natural kin, at one with the winds. The storm is a warhawk's cradle. But surely each of these cultures couldn't all have coexisted in Majula peacefully. And if competition wasn't the driving force, what compelled them to inhabit the same space? There is something peculiar about the ancient dragon society. The motivations of the dragons remain shrouded in mystery. Unlike titans who fought for power, expanded their empire, and continually refined their technologies to prosper, dragons appear to have operated by their own set of principles. Their actions and behaviours seem to transcend the usual patterns observed in the natural world. Even in the present day, following their downfall, dragons do not conform to the typical whims of life. Some lie dormant in their dilapidated city, but most tirelessly soar around the ruins in an endless cycle, unfazed by any events beneath them, including the presence of an impostor slaying their brethren. Placidusax, their leader, merely waits, as though losing their god has robbed the Lord of their purpose. Only those who have acted like the rest of nature are found elsewhere: Fortisax, Lanceax, or modern dragons. All these mysteries, and much more, can be unravelled by distilling this wide-reaching dragon civilization into its core principles. Ancient dragon society had but a few fundamental tenets, and they all derived from their one god. The foremost pillar was time, over which the dragon's god uniquely held power. A scale of the ancient dragon lord lightly twists time. Time, that which all must pass within. The next pillar was their queen's domain, destined death. Death, that which all must meet. The final pillar shimmered with gold. The Elden Ring. Order, that which forms life from chaos and sprouts new beginnings. Beginnings, ends, and the time to link them. The god of the dragons, the god of time, is the god of many faces. It wears the faces of all other gods, dressed in the guise of all events and all nature. Under their watch, all is seen into existence, and when the time comes, all are brought to an end, including other gods, for they too exist within the passage of time. It is the ability to twist time that allows the creation of a weapon capable of slaying a god. The god of the dragons, the god of many faces, encompasses all other gods. However, its purpose stands apart from the rest. This god, perhaps the one great, does not vie for powers or followers. It is far more passive and serves as the great overseer, and the civilization of the dragons are its eternal guardians, who watch over the ages in the pursuit of balance across the realm. But this balance they sought was not inactivity across the land. It was found through cycles of life and death, the rise and falls of peoples, species, cultures, and even superpowers, the natural spirals of life. The dragons observed the land, intervening only when necessary, and importantly, their god did not play favourites. A society rising in power and even taking control of the lands was welcome. This was part of the ebb and flow of nature. Instead, action was only taken when the very balance of the land was jeopardized, and a society or god threatened to ground itself so firmly that its natural end was overcome. And so, the roles of the three principal sectors of the Society of Farum Azula come into focus. The dragons, whose form has become symbolic of all manner of protections, are literally walls of living rock and served to protect this civilization. Their eternal strength acted as a deterrent to those with lofty ambitions, serving a passive, defensive role rather than an active or offensive one. Being truly eternal meant their station had no cracks or moments of weakness. The second sector, humans, was led by royalty, which in all likelihood was the Gloam-Eyed Queen, whose scarce references align perfectly with Farum Azula. She led the Apostles, two of whom guard an ancient shrine within Farum Azula, likely dedicated to the god of many faces, the god of time. Destined Death exhibits clear thematic links to the god of time, delivering a true end for life. The locations of godskins are consistently related to the Gloam-Eyed Queen. Even the noble in the Volcano Manor defends a church that also seems to pay homage to the god of time. Throughout Farum Azula, there is a celebration of death, and a vital role of beasts is inherently connected to Destined Death. The Queen of Destined Death must be of ancient origins, as she predates the Golden Order. The nobles are ancient, and no gods have been killed during the time of the Golden Order to provide the skin for their robes. Although the Gloam-Eyed Queen herself has few references in the present day, the full history of the lands between makes it evident how much points to her as the Queen of the Dragon Society, a role which, with the aid of her apostles, was fundamentally that of a backstop, a safety net for the god of time for those that sought to evade their fate, a concept Melina understands well.
To deliver you what is yours.
For most beings, however, their true death arrived naturally, and the role of the Dragon Society was primarily a passive one, for life rarely required their intervention. Indeed, Destined Death is not intrinsically offensive in nature. The Apostles were all embraced by the Gloam-Eyed Queen, and the Black Flame was their armour within. Such knowledge and nuance has, in the present, unfortunately been lost to time. Lastly, there were the Beastmen, who were naturally subservient following the gift of intelligence that was in all likelihood from the dragons and the god of many faces. The design celebrates a beast's 5 fingers, symbolic of the intelligence once granted upon their kind, a gift that would wane should the dragon civilization crumble. For, in the present day, beasts who yet possess knowledge beyond human ken have begun to revert to their animal ways, in likely the same manner that they gained intelligence. The beasts must have felt how their wildness slipped away as civilization took hold. Though the beasts were graced, they were passive in this process, morphed to carry out the will of the god of many faces. This included all sorts of tasks, such as weaponsmithing and likely lots of construction, but certain beasts were crafted for a much more crucial role for the god of time, empowered by the gloam of their queen, a position that only beasts have seemed to fulfill even to the present day. Beasts are drawn to champions and to lords, a quality likely by design, much like their subservience. The beasts, their eyes and ears covered, represent an oath: see nothing, hear nothing, doubt nothing, and carry on. along the path set in stone. It appears that select beasts were intentionally crafted to become shadows, for they appear to have been moulded past even a natural compliance in case they tried to resist their fate. While all beings may naturally have shadows in this world, these beasts were crafted for and assigned to individuals of power who were deemed to require closer monitoring. Even in this role, there was a hierarchy. The statement, "Wolves are the shadows of the Empyrean," suggests that other types of beasts, for instance, lions, may have fulfilled less vital roles. There are a wide range of beasts, even in Majula. The wording of the Empyrean rather than of an Empyrean is also noteworthy. Could this imply a shared Empyrean for all such shadows, perhaps their creator, rather than individual Empyreans for each shadow? Wolf shadows were granted the power of destined death by the Gloam-Eyed Queen, and manifested this power in their weapons and eyes after the rite. While the Gloam-Eyed Queen may be the source of such power, being a shadow-bound beast seems to cause the same gloam-eyed coloration, a seemingly permanent effect. For though Blythe swore to serve no master but Rani, in defiance of the fate he was born to, his eyes remain this distinctive purple colour, similar to how his weapon remains accented by purple despite its altered power. Curiously, Malekith's eyes are actively hidden from view. With destined death and blood which glints with gold and thus never rots or decays, these shadows were ready to be sent out into the world for a life of servitude on the ground. During the early stages of life, the God of Many Faces likely required only the dragons and the Gloam-Eyed Queen to manage the land. However, as life flourished and expanded, more hands were needed to manage this increased complexity, leading to the recruitment of beastmen, and the incorporation of beastmen further cements the timeline of the ancient dragons. Not only were they established by the Titan Age, illustrated by the bespoke motifs on the Forge of the Giants, as well as its connection to destined death, but likely well before it. The Beastman's history depicts three clear ages. The Stone Age, marked by their initial tools. Stones were the first weapons of the beasts who had gained intelligence. The Copper Age, evidenced best by their burial sites, and the Iron Age, during which their latest weapons were developed. Despite building the Forge of the Giants and pioneering the art of smithing, the Titans were primarily characterized by their mastery over stone, marking most of their age as the Stone Age. Thus, the Dragon Society was already well established by the time of the Titans, such that they were capable enough to be able to give intelligence to beasts. The purpose of ancient dragon society as primarily passive guardians of the cycles of nature, the immortality of these divine creatures, and the timing for gifting intelligence to beasts suggests that the ancient dragons are likely the most ancient dynasty of the lands between. First came the God of Many Faces. In time, there splintered further gods. Eventually, the first Elden Ring was created, giving rise to life. Of significance here is that an Elden Ring is a dynamic and flexible phenomenon. Runes are a fundamental aspect of the world. Great runes can be discovered, gestated, lost, and therefore likely also created. They can be morphed, added to the Elden Ring, or removed. Some seem to be attributed to specific individuals, uniquely termed Elden Runes. This is how different versions of Elden Rings are seen throughout history. This most ancient version is the most complex known iteration. Power flowed through it rather than being contained within, and was distributed through numerous rings down into spirals below, the spirals of life. The Greater Will was likely aligned with the Dragon faction during this time. In addition to the Elden Ring, gold prominently features in the dragons and beastmen's bodies and their culture, which raises the question, were the Two Fingers also part of this society? Finger-like creatures do seem to naturally exist in this world, and have existed since ancient times, as evidenced by the fingerprint stone shield and the ringed finger. It is said that the Gloam-Eyed Queen was an Empyrean chosen by the Fingers. However, the phrase "it is said" could suggest this information is hearsay or propaganda, possibly spread during Marika's reign to solidify the Two Fingers' absolute power. After all, there are numerous details surrounding the Two Fingers which does call into question their legitimacy. For instance, the depiction of the legend of the Two Fingers shows a starkly different shape to those in the present day. And in the present day, Enya, a finger reader, questions their power in a manner that seems unrelated to their current state.
The realm and all life in ruins. Impossible events transpire beyond the ken of the fingers.
But most importantly, the legend of the Two Fingers began a new faith which would only emerge many, many years later. Therefore, the Two Fingers were seemingly not established at this stage, and the Gloam-Eyed Queen was not chosen by them. It is possible the dragon faction had their own fingers though, as the Black Flame sigil is remarkably similar to a fingerprint. She would have still been an Empyrean, however, before becoming queen.
A new god to forge a new order.
This quality is therefore not given by the Two Fingers, but identified by them. The Three Fingers were also yet to emerge, or at least yet to earn that name, for the very seeds from which Frenzy first sprouted came from the readerless fingers. This phrasing draws comparison to the expectation of fingers having readers, or at least being able to be read, and thus places them as after the normalization of finger readers, likely by the Two Fingers. A very interesting detail, for if this was the case, and the Dragon Society didn't have their own fingers, it would suggest that frenzy, a product of those in suffering reaching a breaking point and losing hope, was yet to manifest in the world, and could imply the God of Many Faces and their society were successfully maintaining the world's harmony as unbiased guardians. Faramazula's culture epitomized this philosophy, celebrating death while also welcoming all walks of life within and beyond their borders. Dragons, beasts, humans, birds, and even worm faces find solace at Faramazula, each with their own hierarchies and nuances. The Draconians had a lifespan that was typically short, embracing the cycles of nature. Worm faces are arguably one of the lowest life forms, worms infesting their gut and burrowing into their faces. Covered in pockmarked skin, they are shunned in the present-day Altus Plateau and take refuge in a foggy forest, where some weep, others pace, and all except the largest cover themselves with dirty cloaks. The largest wears a slightly more intricate garb, but it turns out that more is hidden beneath these garbs than their forms. Indeed, the worm faces in Faramazula, the only other location they gather in groups, do not cover themselves, and on them are found bespoke clothing as detailed as the beastmen, adorned with medallions and intricate gold fabric winds around them. Even their sticks are beautifully crafted. It seems even worm faces, or what turned into them, were welcomed. But the philosophy of the dragons is best illustrated in Borealis's Mist. The ice dragons were once lords of the mountaintops long ago, until they were defeated by the fire giants and chased from their peak. Even if these dragons were modern dragons, they were still kin of the ancient dragons that were chased from their territory. Yet, as established earlier, the giants and titans had a positive relationship with the dragons, and even worked together at times. Thus did the dragons rule over the lands between, not by a firm hand, but from a light touch at a far distance. Their rule, and thus their power, even in the modern day, was built with faith in their god. For many ages, civilizations rose and fell, and though it's unclear what order these all arose, it is certain that many could have existed at the same time, and they were all approved of by the God of Many Faces. Similarly, from the volume of godskin amassed by the Gloam-Eyed Queen, it is clear there were no small number of gods and their followers who were made to meet their destined end. Once a sign of the gods' plural wrath, this incantation became a trophy of the nobles' god hunt. Most such civilizations have been lost to time, More still were likely wiped from history during the Titan cataclysm, and few items remained, save for the odd shield with ancient designs, such as an ancient red thorn or an ancient cipher. Other societies were more fortunate and survived the extinction event, thanks to the stubbornness of life. Indeed, even the Titan lineage was not entirely wiped out, as the fire giants survived until the war against Marika. Smithing remained central to their culture. In the distant past, smithing was considered divine. Trolls in the present day continue to use mining tools, and the aged Iji exemplifies the refined touch these beings maintain. Another society that survived the Titan cataclysm was that of the astrologers, who preceded the sorcerers and considered the fire giants their neighbours. The astrologers were established during the Titan era, and their relationship to their neighbours was clearly positive. Both factions collaborated to create the legendary Sword of Night and Flame. Furthermore, the Carians, who even by the time of Renala considered themselves astrologers, share the same sigil for their sorceries as the Crystallians. They were taught magic downpour by the Crystallians to mark the swearing of the Old Concord. Forming such a close connection to the inscrutable Crystallians suggests the Carians were also present during the Titan Age when they were created. Furthermore, the Crystallians seem to have ties to all the present-day sorceress factions. They cleave close to the ideals of the primeval current, and as such, they are revered guests of the sorcerers. They reside by the Moonlight Altar, whose surroundings and architecture relate to both the Carians and the Nox. They are found within Raya Lucaria's crystal cave and tunnel, and in Celia's hideaway. Only those in Miquella's Erdtree break this pattern. Thus, it would seem that the Nox, the Academy, and Celia were also present during this age, though later than the Carians or astrologers. The Nox and Celia belong to a separate school of sorceress art, and will be looked at shortly, but glintstone sorcerers are the descendants of astrologers. Thus, the Academy came after Caria, who in turn came from the astrologers on the mountaintops, as described by Founding Reign of Stars, the eldest primeval sorcery, said to have been discovered by an ancient astrologer, thought to be the founding glintstone sorcery. The glimpse of the primeval current that the astrologer saw became real, and the star's amber rained down on this land. The magical projectile of the Night and Flame stance appears to be a less refined and thus earlier version of Comet Azure, which may imply that the origins of the Academy stemmed from Caria originally. Azure was a Grand Master at the Academy alongside Lusat, a rank so high that none have reached it since their expulsion, suggesting the two sorcerers were central to the Academy's conception. This is pushed further by the stylization of the glintstone crowns that might have been a method to mimic the process Lusat and Azure undergo, and the term primeval sorcerers further cements the ancient origins of Raya Lucaria. The Celians and the Nox share origins, as is apparent from their respective architecture and culture. Their night sorcery sigil denotes the giant thrones found in Celia, Noxtella, and Nokron, whose associated giant maidens place such history in the Titan Age. But most curious is that bubble sorcery also shares this design. Furthermore, in contrast to the staff and sword cross of the Carians and Crystallians, these sigils have two staffs instead. The similarity between these designs suggests that one came first and the other repurposed the sigil for their newfound societies. A sword with a staff seems to indicate that the sorceress arts had not yet been refined to the point of discarding the melee armament. Furthermore, the staff that excels at casting night sorceries is the Staff of Loss, a staff missing its glintstone, which indicates that glintstone sorcery had been established, and that the staff set itself apart through the removal of its glintstone. Therefore, since glintstone sorcerers are descended from astrologers, it seems the Crystallians and the Carians came first, and bubble and night sorceries followed. However, bubble and night sorceries are vastly different, and Claymen were not part of the Nox society. The Claymen are naturally suggested to hail from a far earlier time than the Nox. These life forms are more simplistic and underdeveloped when compared to the Eternal Cities. Some seem to be fishing, or digging, eating, or just inert. bowed with age, the warped remains of priests searched for revelation in service of the ancient dynasty. The Nox have priests of their own. So what was this ancient dynasty? The bubbles given off by golems controlled by crystal darts may link them to the Titans, who were well versed in artificial life. Plus, their weapons have been made from a sharpened meteorite shard. Or could the ruins Claymen are typically found within relate to their ancient dynasty? Indeed, the design of the iconic statue of a man clutching a tablet with another at his feet may suggest these sculptures are also made of clay. These ruins are found on the surface in Liurnia, by the Ainzel and Shifra rivers, and most notably at the entrance of, and within, the Grand Cloister. A cloister means a covered walk in a convent, monastery, college, or cathedral. This was an incredibly important location once. Might the purple crystals above be the reason? If the purple indicated some effect over gravity, perhaps this would lift the area below and halt the flow of water downstream, generating the stagnation needed for rot. Though the environment might have changed drastically since those days. Found within the cloister is the scorpion stinger, dagger fashioned from a great scorpion's tail, glistening with scarlet rot. A ceremonial tool used by heretics, crafted from the relic of a sealed outer god. Being heretical places this dagger's creation many ages later, once a certain monotheistic religion had swept across the lands between. But it does illustrate that this location must have always been associated with rot, and thus the mysterious statue was part of an ancient rot civilization. Not only are these statues clearly of the same styling as the cloister itself, but there are even differently sized statues. For while there is one enormous statue at the end of the hall, above a sacred room containing the heretical weapon, hidden behind this statue is another of the same design, just much smaller. Perhaps the smaller statues hint at the civilization's modest beginnings, while the larger, more prominent statue signifies its later influence and might. And this was a mighty civilization that encompassed both great rivers in the lands between, from northern Liurnia all the way to Caelid. Furthermore, there is a subtle hint at a potential conflict between the giants and the rot civilization at some point in history. Jeren says, talking about the giant blacksmith Iji,
And funny thing, his swords were all blunt as stone, but not one of them decayed when faced with the scarlet rot.
So perhaps this dynasty was powerful enough that the Titan's superpower had to develop new techniques to combat the power of their god, a god that was rot itself. The ruins seem to be tactically placed to lock off external access to the rivers of flowing water, the antithesis to rot, to stagnant, overflowing life. This would make them a formidable faction, safeguarding their weakness. Indeed, Shifra can be translated to fairy, and it was a fairy who in legend bestowed a flowing sword upon a blind swordsman. Blade in hand, the swordsman sealed away an ancient god. Perhaps it was the spirit of the river that taught this swordsman, for a river does naturally, maybe even blindly, cut away at the scarlet rot. But how could one swordsman, even with the power of flowing water, take down such a mighty entity while the civilization flourished and blocked access to the rivers? Even before the Titan cataclysm layered new earth across the land, the Rot dynasty was underground. The Grand Cloister was always, by definition, covered, and currently marks the second lowest depth in the lands between. But while this meant the meteoric event did not wipe out the civilization of Rot, the ground shifting, and indeed being entirely removed in the centre of the landmass, likely damaged their infrastructure, and opened up an opportunity for the blind swordsman to learn from the rivers and attack. There are no sources as to when this civilization met its demise, but thanks to the blind swordsman, the Gloam-Eyed Queen did not have to intervene, and the Rot god was simply sealed away. Importantly, true gods, the Kami forces of nature, cannot be completely killed even by the Gloam-Eyed Queen, just like the god of many faces. After all, these gods are its faces, and can only ebb and flow. Instead, it is the vassals of gods, the physical manifestations of them, that is slain. This is why the Elden Ring can still exist after defeating the Elden Beast. The greater will remains, but the god of the realm is no more. The remains of the Rot dynasty suggests its height was during the Titan era, and fell shortly afterwards. If the Claymen were part of the dynasty, perhaps they were created to seek answers on their demise. The link between bubble sorcery and night sorcery is quite the mystery. The Nox Society shows no appreciation of Rot, but their ant mounts might, who are often found in tunnels that fester similarly to Rot, not to mention the proximity of the Lake of Rot and the Grand Cloister to Nox Stella. Perhaps Rot is not as far from the Nox as first expected, and some of their ancestors left to form the Rot civilization. The iconic statue is also quite the mystery. In the present day, there remains no memory of the ruins, let alone this statue. They are such a blank canvas that Mog is happy to set up his new dynasty in the grave of this ancient civilization. His followers even start to pay homage to the forgotten statue. So too do the ancestrals settle within some of these ruins. Whatever this man signified, he was of extreme importance, for the statues of him are huge, detailed, and numerous. Perhaps this was the rock god, the role Marika or the Gloam-Eyed Queen fulfilled in their cultures. Or perhaps this was a prophet of some kind, imparting vital knowledge via the tablet. The root motifs are certainly interesting, perhaps relating to some arboreal vision. Returning to the Nox and Celians, like the aforementioned sorcerers, they have survived to the present day. As such, their technology and culture has developed continuously rather than being lost to time. However, details of their history is sparse, likely by design after they invoked the ire of the Greater Will in more recent years. It is unclear whether the Eternal Cities were ever above ground. Dukist herba grows plentifully around the cities, which gives off the faint glow of starlight. This would suggest that they once grew directly beneath the stars, and that their power has become faint from years beneath the surface under a false night sky. However, even during the blackest nights, sojourns underground, or imprisonment in jail, the stars are never far from a sorcerer's side. Thus, the influence of the stars is not beyond the reach of the Eternal Cities, despite being underground. The Nox also survived the Cataclysm, something that would have been very difficult on the surface. So it seems likely that these cities were always subterranean, but that's not to say they weren't active on the surface. Likely built after the Titans were gone and the land had stabilized, there are a number of locations across the entirety of the lands between that feature Nox architecture, from Ordina to Celia, Leyendell, Liurnia at Manor Celes, the Church of Vows, or throughout the lakes, and multiple lifts that effortlessly offer transport between the surface and underground dwellings. The Nox were successful and clearly adept at navigating positive relations, for a time at least. Perhaps this was when the mausoleums were first created too, another possible form of artificial life that would therefore date their creation during the Titan era. Their architecture is clearly of a similar build to the Eternal Cities, but it is unclear if their purpose was always as a mausoleum. One is capable of powerful magic in the present day, suggesting they may not just house bodies, but keep them safe. Now, the mausoleum is where the bodies of soulless demigods are laid to rest. The Eternal Cities, perhaps working with the Academy, also produced the artificial life forms Albinaurics during this ancient era. They are said to have been created from a primordial drop of dew, which dates them as pre-Erdtree Empire. There are no other known factions that have ties to the Albinaurics and their silver themes either. The Albinaurics' most formidable foes were sorcerers. This oppression was not immediate, however, given how plentifully they survived to the modern day. Furthermore, the Albinaurics of old learnt sorcery, using a short staff with blue glintstone embedded. Instead, sorcerers became their most formidable foes once sorceress allegiances shifted in the ages to come, and their blood became heretical, unlike any humour that flows in our grand realm. Albinaurics continue to be made over time, and in the present day there are old male Albinaurics, young female Albinaurics, as well as second generation Albinaurics with dumpy heads that resemble those of frogs. The right to create this silver life remains unclear, but the Albinaurics harbour a secret. They cast sorcery with their innate arcaneness. Silver tears and their mimicry were likely developed at a later date, as they form closer relations to the Nox in the present day. Mimic tears are the result of an attempt by the Eternal City to forge a lord, which may even place this as late as the Erdtree era. Whatever the case may be, silver tears were created before their banishment underground, such that some silver tears can be found hiding on the surface. Another culture from the Titan Age was that of the Snakes. There was an ancient serpent deity and a now forgotten religion practiced on Mount Gelmir. This religion likely also paid homage to the god of many faces, where snakes serve as mortal eternity, the fundamental grounded aspect of nature, the instinct to survive. A link to the dragons that is further evidenced by the beast iconography in the prison town, suggesting this area was built prior to the manor itself, even if the deity was too large to survive the Titan cataclysm. And so, this society also persisted. Finally, there was the realm of the sun. Today, the seat of the sun is long faded away. This was a shield of honour, implying an established society, and those who wield this shield, as those who live in death, are found all over the lands between, including in Majula by beastmen. Might the seat of the sun have been related to Dragon Society in some way? After all, the sanctuary stone, found near places where ruins have fallen from the sky, feeds and strengthens the light as it shines, and the sun never seems to set in Majula. Could the tombstones found throughout the land, where skeletons with the shield commonly arise, be from this civilization too? Nonetheless, the seat of the sun clearly covered the realm, and thus was once a powerful faction. In the present day, however, the sun is surprisingly insignificant. It is dwarfed by the moons in its apparent size, and even the Erdtree was once as warm as the gentle sun. Therefore, to allow the time for such a shift of power and to fall from memory, the seat of the sun must have set prior to the Titan cataclysm. The period following the Titan extinction was prosperous and saw many cultures, new and old, flourish. Indeed, the downfall of the first superpower of the lands between will have opened up the opportunity for others to rise up and seize control. But who? Perhaps this would have been the civilization of Rot, had the blind swordsmen not sealed their god away. Or maybe the Deathbirds and their society, or the Fire Monks, the ancient Stone Lords, the various pre-existing civilizations. Or what about a civilization with the legacy of a disbanded army, the Banished Knights, whose beautifully crafted sets can be found throughout the lands between. The Banished Knights generally feature in the present day in fortresses, Castle Sol, Stormvale, or the fortified manor. There is even evidence of them at Redmane Castle. But what faction did they belong to? These banished soldiers, whether by misfortune or misdeed, were forced to abandon their homes. Most of these knights were sent to the fringes, where they were forced to start anew with only despair for company. There is unfortunately little about them. There are two styles of knights, for some don a deep red scarf, a change that likely followed their banishment. Red is a symbol of wild animal nature, which contrasts the highly trained and civilized manner with which they hold themselves, both during and outside of combat. Furthermore, the scarf is posited to have been used to block the winds, for on the outskirts the winds bite with a stinging fierceness. Finally, the original design of the armour features a beautifully crafted dragon on the helm, but this is removed for those who wear the scarf, even those found in Majula. There is no reference to what misfortune or misdeed led to the army being disbanded, but the event was absolute, and these knights never reformed into a complete army, though they did retain their armour, and sometimes their flag too. Even in the present day, these soldiers are incredibly strong. They seem to be consistently learning to improve their technique. They have incorporated new skills depending on where they work, such as dragon arts or the power of the storm. There are even golden banished sets found in the capital. Nonetheless, the history of the Banished Knights is curiously scattered across the lands between, for each location has history that seems distinct from the other. One such place was Stormveil Castle. Built after the Titan era as implied by this painting, Stormveil was home to the Stormhawks and likely the Storm Lord, indicating an organised and established society with unique traditions. Another location was the Fortified Manor, which features bestial reliefs that may explain its later purpose relating to Godfrey. Stormveil and the Fortified Manor do share architectural styles, and both beasts and Stormhawks could have been related to the dragons, but the mystery remains. How were the Banished Knights involved? In the time where there was no Erdtree, death was burned in ghost flame. Deathbirds were the keepers of that fire. The Deathbird culture was created at the latest during this pre-Erdtree era. However, the giant skeletons may suggest that they were in fact established during the Titan era and shared their techniques with the giants. Their society had an ancient sacrificial rite, which recycled the magical aspects of those within, restoring FP in the present day. This was a magical society after all. The heart sings when one draws close to death, and thus does one cling so tenaciously to life, to render up a death worth offering. The Helfen Steeple was likely part of this process because it has the Ash of War ruinous ghost flame. The black steeple of the Helfen guides the dead of the spirit world. The lamplight is similar to Grace in appearance, only it is said that it can only be seen by those who met their death in battle. Similarly, this dates the Tibia Mariners this far back too, whose summons show that they too are servants of death. Back then, their job was as simple boatmen to help the dead's journey. What they need is leadership. There were servants of death and priests, guardians of the birds, who were uniquely rewarded through the rite of death, which also serves as an oath sworn to their distant resurrection. Then there was the twin bird, who is said to be the envoy of an outer god and mother of the Deathbirds. An envoy of an outer god, control over resurrection, and a right for the dead. Curiously similar to the Erdtree civilization. The birds are graveyard firekeepers. It is said they rake out the ashen remains of the dead from their kilns. But what was done with the ashen remains? Given the level of ceremony, it is unlikely they were tossed to the wind. Else, the cinders of the ancient death hacks might have become a horde of vengeful spirits. Instead, ashes were surely stored in something akin to cremation urns, which are found in plenty in the catacombs across the entirety of the lands between. These catacombs have been repurposed for the Erdtree faction by the present day, for the Erdtree culture would have no need for tombs, sarcophagi, or storage of bodies of any kind. Their system involved being taken back into the Erdtree to fuel the cycle of rebirth. Instead, these catacombs were created well before the Erdtree, and they were built specifically around Great Tree roots. A controversial description. Whether or not the term Great Tree is the correct name, it is clear that there were World Tree forms that predate the Erdtree Empire. If the two World Tree names were completely synonymous, the sentence becomes, the roots of the Erdtree were once linked to the Erdtree, which would be very strange, since by definition, a tree and its roots must link when the roots are grown. Instead, if this was the case, the phrasing should have been, the roots of the Erdtree are no longer linked to the Erdtree, highlighting the changed, abnormal situation. Though that's not to say the Erdtree can't derive from this World Tree, something that will be looked at later. Going forward therefore, the term Great Tree will be used to denote the World Tree entity of this era. The heroes' graves are likely part of the same culture, for, as will be explored with the arrival of the Erdtree faction, it seems that Marika went to great effort hiding the past by rebranding and repurposing buildings across the land. In this case, removing the head, and thus the identity of the statue on top of each entrance. So, was the Great Tree also part of the Deathbird society? Was this how they could promise resurrection? Before continuing, it's important to establish the role of trees within the world, for they are not just an arboreal type of flora. On looking closely, there are examples beyond the Erdtree or Great Tree that hint at their power. For while these later societies focused on one all-powerful tree, other ancient societies incorporated trees differently. There are trees in Majula which are part stone. They incorporate the power beneath them. What about the Nox? Almost everywhere they are found or have associations with are these curious white trees that have recently attracted the attention of the ancestral followers. Both cultures clearly draw some form of power from these trees, and it is likely that they were more alive in ancient times. Then there was the prophet of the Rot civilization. Might the roots have been related to trees in some form, a prophecy of a coming great tree? Trees in the lands between are a fundamental part of life. They appear to be able to absorb the land and the life therein, distill this power, and then distribute it depending on how they are managed. Ancient societies made use of this imbalance, propagating forests. Then, infamously, later societies realized the system could be taken advantage of and funneled their efforts into singular, mighty trees that brought about entirely new possibilities. There is little that makes reference to the Great Tree, but there are some environmental clues, a distinct relief and flag. Both of these clearly feature a tree of worship, but they are far too different to the classic depictions to also be featuring the Erdtree, right? Except the Erdtree surcoat and the Tree and Beast surcoat, which each use the thin tree design, are both said to depict the Erdtree. So are these simply two interpretations of the Erdtree? It is certainly possible. However, if such variation is allowed in official productions of the Erdtree, is it not strange that there are only two and not more? Additionally, if both designs were interchangeable in depicting the Erdtree, then why is there such a clear pattern between their usage? Every thin depiction relates to an earlier time in history than the alternate styling. Even the surcoats, where Godfrey and the capital forces would have arisen right at the start of the Erdtree Empire, if not earlier. On the other hand, this Erdtree styling was only applied to later editions, such as the more modern Leyendale structures, whose later construction is clear when seen from above. Not to mention that while the latter design is always found in locations clearly paired to the Erdtree, the former design is seen somewhat randomly across the realm, with no clear pattern relating to the Erdtree or its empire. Instead, this thin tree depiction might mark one of the first examples of Marika's nature to occlude the past and repurpose previous creations. Look at the Erdtree Sentinels. The Tree Sentinels are the standard to which all defenders of the Erdtree aspire, adorned with a cape featuring the mark of the sacred tree. Except, despite being the leading figures of the Erdtree, perhaps even the first, this cape's depiction is unique, and it's almost unrecognisable. Though subtle, it seems the early stages of Marika and the Erdtree's rise to fame is painted in these three symbols. There was the first design, well established and respected from before Marika's rise. The second, a new, unclear mark that was never replicated. And then a third design many years later. Marika, after failing to gain traction with an original mark, adopted the Great Tree's sigil to both rise in power and occlude the past. And only once she rose to power did she present the new, ultimate Erdtree depiction. And with history obscured, the Great Tree's design could remain where it was, believed by all to depict the Erdtree to the present day. Thus, this design was a different, earlier tree, likely the Great Tree. The Great Tree designs are found in the fortified manor, Stormvale Castle, the prison town in Mount Gelmir, the Colosseums, the Grand Lifts, Redmane Castle, the Carian Study Hall, as well as on the Divine Bridges, built to access the Divine Towers that had become inaccessible during the Titan Cataclysm. This Great Tree civilization was enormous, but as the wide array of locations indicate, it was also multifaceted and included a wide range of independent societies. Their reign was not to conquer and replace, but to convert. And this was likely the role of the Banished Knights, marked by their unique banner. A crusade across the lands to force other societies to ally with them, which explains their mark left throughout the lands and ties the previously discussed factions together. Leyendell was likely the capital for the Great Tree Empire. It was positioned by the Great Tree, incorporates the Great Tree relief within the city, and the heroes' graves generally centre around Leyendell. Heroes would have naturally wanted to be buried with a ceremony near the capital. Thus, the Nox, who built Lower Leyendell, must have also been part of the Great Tree Empire, if not the original seed. Perhaps the glovewort flora and associated ceremonies date this far back too. Since times of old, large gloveworts were used to comfort heroic spirits, given in tribute to those who died the most glorious of deaths, in the hope their stories would become legend. There are many statues, reliefs, and buildings which hail from this empire. These statues of Poring in particular likely relate to funerary rites, as they are often found within catacombs. They are found in some churches too, illustrating their religious importance for the age. They are similar in style to those found in these towers, part of the newly built divine bridges, as well as those of the Carians, such as on their study hall, which may suggest an alliance. After all, their lift systems share designs. And both buildings feature the Great Tree design. But most statues are found in catacombs, which does bring the catacomb golems into question. Could the catacombs have been built during the Titan era? A hint at the cycles of the Lands Between, perhaps? Nonetheless, the extent of catacombs across the Lands Between suggests the Empire covered the realm, but there were likely societies beyond their influence. There was the civilization of Zamor, who were ancient enemies of the Fire Giants. Cloaked in icy tempests, the Knights of Zamor have challenged the Fire Giants since ancient times. Their culture involved an apparent devotion to winter. Perhaps the Khaden too were around during this age, since in the present day their home settlement is nowhere to be found. But these hulking, fearless mercenaries are said to hail from the mountaintops of the wintry north. Since they were likely driven from their homelands, they have roamed as simple mercenaries to the present day. Then there were beings of meteoric origin, as the entire history of the Lands Between is riddled with meteoric and celestial events. Onyx Lords, Alabaster Lords, and likely Falling Star Beasts too arose during this time. The Lords were donned as such in reverential fear of their destructive power. Though the Onyx and Alabaster beings appear similar, they seem to have been separate. Each weapon they wield is unique to one faction, either made with white-blue or golden-hued meteoric ore. Curiously, their weapons share design similarities, as well as functionally similar Ashes of War to the meteoric ore blade, a katana forged from meteoric ore to dispatch life forms born of falling stars. Could this imply the two were at war with each other, or sought to stamp out the falling star beasts? Whatever the case, their history is both varied, being found at sites from the Titan era within the Lake of Rot, or at the Academy, and damning, for few remain in the present day. Falling star beasts, when fully grown, become beings known in the present day as Astal, a species, not a name, hence why there are two Astal, and why they require a denomination. In the present day, there are young falling star beasts, a full-grown one, 3 malformed stars, and then the 2 Astals, which suggests a lengthy development period to become fully formed. As such, it is possible the first falling star beasts arose in ancient times. There were the Fire Monks, who hail from the mountaintops of the Giants. They had a focus on combat. The unique strong attack rouses fiery combative spirit. And it would seem that they were allied to and honoured the Fire Giants. Sacred seal depicting the one-eyed god of the Fire Giants, adorned with braids of red hair, enhances giant flame incantations. even if they were not associated with the fire giants directly, they were certainly already fire monks before their later roles as guardians. Indeed, their incantations were likely what drew Marika's attention for use within the war against the giants. However, the hierarchy with the prelates as commanders of the fire monks was not yet established. The prelates' attire and weighty frame symbolized the onus of their grave vows as guardians of the flame. Thus, their sets were crafted for their role as guardians, a role that they were appointed to by Marika after the war against the giants. Furthermore, their weapon, the prelate thorned whip, is fashioned in the image of the Briars of Sin. This would suggest that the Thorn Sorcerers had also already partnered with the Fire Monks before their appointment as guardians, and served as the inspiration for the weapon's creation. These Thorn Sorcerers were exiled criminals from Raya Lucaria, for their aberrant sorceries were most reviled by the Academy because they scaled with faith rather than intelligence. These sorcerers were seen as heretical, wielding a withered sapling that turns the blood of sacrifices pierced by it into glintstone, similar to hex magic. The guilty, their eyes gouged by thorns, lived in eternal darkness. There they discovered the Blood Star. However, it would seem this Blood Star did little to further their cause, and to the present day remain paired to the Fire Monks. Flame Protect Me is the most ancient of the Fire Monks' incantations and was used during the war against the giants, during which it protected the champions of the Erdtree. This may suggest the monks knew no incantations before the war. However, it is more likely that this was instead their most well-established incantation that was created well before the war, and instead serves as the reason Marika enlisted them. After all, going turncoat is a recurring theme with this group. This explains their attire, and that their ancient incantations were not focused on combat so much as the value of fire beyond destruction, an aspect the fire giants and the titans were well versed in. The ice dragons were surely modern dragons, for ancient dragons did not compete in territorial aggressions, nor did they channel elements other than lightning or fire. Therefore, during this period at the latest, were born the modern dragons by Grail, the Elder Dragon. Grail was the mother of all dragons, dwarfing all who stood before her like a looming mountain. Grail stepped down from the pedestal of true immortality and joined the mortal realm. She became a mother and partook in the cycles of life. These dragons lost a pair of wings, and their arms conjoined with the remaining pair. They were no longer immortal, vulnerable to earthly corruption, but they were successful beings who spread across the land, and many survived to the present day. The Great Tree's superpower, like the one that came before, was fated not to last. Whether by misfortune or misdeed, the alliance broke, and though there remains no record of the event, the Erdtree can serve as an illustration of what could have happened. For the Great Tree could not simply be killed. Such a tree transcended normal rules, and, similar to the Erdtree, likely met its end, being burnt. Only one flame could have managed such a feat, the flame of ruin. However, as the Tarnished find out in the present day, even this is not enough. Instead, a second power is required, the power to force something to meet an end it fights against, destined death. Thus, the power of both the Fire Giants and the Dragon faction would have been needed. If this was true, then the Great Tree must have transcended the rules of nature and threatened the balance of the land, for only then does the Gloam-Eyed Queen get involved. Once again, the philosophy of the God of Many Faces is clear, for the burning of the Great Tree did not mark the ruin of the associated societies, but simply a disbanding. In fact, this also illustrates the control and restraint of the fell god and the giant society, further illustrating how the Titan civilization worked. The Great Tree civilization's crusading knights were banished, which they accepted honorably, but no societies seem to have been eliminated. This is why so many of the contributing cultures persist to the present day. The superpower's architecture remains somewhat intact, and beasts, part of the doomed civilization, as well as Banished Knights, remained fully welcome in Majula. Only the Great Tree, and likely the god at the head of it all, were eliminated. which in turn fractured the Empire. But the destruction of the Great Tree was not absolute. Instead, perhaps the remnants served to illustrate the cyclic nature of these burnings. Whether by design or otherwise, there remained life within the base of the tree, and its roots remained. Thus did the Great Tree begin to revive, with new offshoots, each giving promise for a new future. And this new phase of the Great Tree, of unregulated sprouting, incorporated all life available to fuel its growth. So began the Age of the Crucible, the final ancient age that preceded the Erdtree Empire, during which new leaders and religions would arise, armed with the wisdom learned from the Great Tree civilization's downfall. Thank you for joining for this episode on the timeline of Elden Ring. For more, consider supporting the channel and get early access to upcoming releases. You can also have your own theories featured in video format on the channel, or even get access to new Lore Before Bed videos ad-free for less than $1. Your support makes content like this possible, so thank you.